Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. I am delighted to introduce Mary Rooke to you from the Daily Caller. She has a new documentary going up for Daily Caller members called Cleaning Up Kamala. And, and we're writing about this all the time, Mary, about I call it the protection racket media. And I don't think that there's been a better cycle for that particular description of the American media industry than this cycle, because these guys turned on a dime when on July, well, really on June 28th, I would say, is when it started, but certainly by, July 22nd, when she became the anointed leader of the Democrat Party, the media has been trying to rehabilitate Kamala Harris, I would argue, beyond her political abilities. But so tell us about Cleaning Up Kamala. What are you saying? First off, is that your approach here as well? And tell us a little bit about the making of this documentary.
Like you said, it's never been more apparent of what the regime media does for Democratic candidates than looking at Kamala Harris and seeing her poll so low for the entirety of Joe Biden's presidency, and then all of a sudden to be bumping up in the polls. And it's not because she's a different candidate or she's doing anything different. It's literally because of the way that they're talking about her. And so a lot of the things that the Daily Caller investigative team wanted to do with this documentary was, one, to make it kind of fun. It takes a little bit of a different turn than what we typically do. We're, kind of doing more serious or, more investigative pieces. And this was just outlining exactly how they help her out. Perfect examples are like the border czar, whether or not she is considered the border czar or not. And, we all heard them say it over and over again. We had, Politico and Axios and all of these publications literally refer to her as the border czar for years. And then all of a sudden, when she's starting to run for president, it's no longer, good for her or her candidacy to be able to be called that, considering the fact that we're seeing millions of people every year come across our southern border and the fact that it's terrorizing Americans. And so, oh no, you can't call her the border czar. Not only is it bad, but it's racist, it's bigoted, it's all these things. Of course, you're going to blame it on a woman. It's, it's every kind of trope that they like to pull out in an election season to help their candidate. And it's funny to watch them kind of spin their wheels. And then the best thing that's been, for American people is X, formerly known as Twitter, where you'll get these community notes where Axios gets noted and it says, well, actually, Axios in 2022 referred to Kamala Harris as the border czar in one of their pieces. And then they have to go back and stealth edit it and, put little editor's notes at the top and say, well, yeah, we were referring to her as then, but now we've since edited this because it's not really applicable and we were wrong to do it in the first place. And it's funny to watch that.
It's interesting because, we'd set this interview up. And then later in the day, we're recording this on a Tuesday. The podcast will drop on Wednesday. I actually ran across the one mainstream media outlet that I think is actually doing at least something of a job in covering this, which is CNN. And Andrew Kaczynski, who runs the K-File over there, has a new, at this moment, about an hour ago or so, dropped a new article talking about how Kamala Harris was 5 years ago was talking about prosecuting oil companies for producing oil and gas company for producing gas because they were contributing to climate change. And she wanted to criminally prosecute them for doing that. And she's gone from that to bragging about oil and gas production.
Being pro fracking and no, don't worry. I'm not going to get rid of any of your oil and gas jobs. Such a farce.
It would be, I don't have a complete aversion to politicians getting smarter.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I'm okay if they come into office and say, oh yeah, I'm championing all this stuff, and then realizing at least on one or two issues, well, maybe that was stupid. But it requires an explanation. And more than that, it requires questions. And so I'll give you an example, Mary, which was that over the weekend, and I think it was on This Week with Martha Raddatz, that J.D. Vance was pressed about his position on national legislation for abortion. As a senator, he was in favor of putting a national 15-week limit on abortion. And he's changed that position now that he's on the ticket with Donald Trump, because he says, well, look, I think that, Donald Trump convinced me that, federalism in this case works, that California is not Alabama, Alabama is not Minnesota, Minnesota, et cetera, right? Which is a good argument. But the point is that he was asked and he had to explain what his change of mind was. And that's all good. And I think Vance handled that very well. Harris isn't even being asked. And on most of these things that she's flip-flopping on, it's the media that's doing the flip-flopping and not Harris herself. Her campaign says, well, she's evolved on that position because, 3 years with Biden, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then people like John Carl on ABC News get testy with Tom Cotton when Tom Cotton points out that she hasn't actually changed her position herself publicly. And John Carl says, well, of course she has. And Cotton says, no, she hasn't. You guys haven't even asked her about this. And that's the issue. Nobody's asking her about this or any of these.
Yeah, and it's part of the cleanup crew operation. I mean, they go out with their talking points and they come out and say, well, no, look, she's become smarter as she's, entered into her vice presidency years. And maybe she supported this in 2019, but after a couple of years working with the American people, she realizes that this isn't the great policy. So she's going to do it this way. But like you said, it's not actually coming out of her mouth. She's not saying where she started and what that evolution was to get to where she is now. And she can't, I think the reality is, and I think that a lot of Americans are realizing that she can't understand her evolution other than it doesn't poll well, other than if she is honest with the American people of where she sits with these policies, people are going to tune her out and not vote for her. Because as much as the Democrats would like this election to be about social issues, it's not. It's about the economy. It's about being able to afford to live in America, raise a family, create a legacy, do all of these things. And the options that she's giving them has nothing to do with that. I'm writing a piece about this today where a lot of, her campaign talking points revolve around abortion rights. And while that plays really heavily with her base of, suburban white women, it means absolutely nothing to the family who is struggling to afford to pay their rent or their mortgage or their electricity bills and all of those things. And so these people are going, okay, great. Well, meanwhile, the majority of Americans might support some level of abortion. They don't support it over being able to afford to eat. They don't support it over closing the border down and ensuring that every town in America doesn't turn into a border country or border state. I mean, it's laughable sometimes whenever you look at it. And if it wasn't real life and if it didn't really heavily affect our day-to-day life, you could sit back and think this is a parody. But, her campaign is one that is smoke and mirrors. You've got the real side of it that Americans know because she has come out and in support of some of these issues. And then you've got the fake side of it, the cover, which is the mainstream media and her campaign coming out and saying, well, no, actually, this is what she's going to do for voters. And did you see that the new, attempt to get Black male voters to come back under the tent today? Just, yes. I mean,
explain it. I'm going to let you explain it because it's a great story. Go ahead and explain it.
She comes out with these bullet points on how she's going to help Black Americans. But essentially, she realizes over the weekend, Barack Obama starts yelling at Black male voters and telling them that, they're not supporting her the way that they supported him. And how dare they not do this, And then you've got you've got her sitting out there that she's doing bullet points. And essentially what she's telling them is she's going to give them free money and access to weed. And it's like, how disgustingly racist is it that this is how you think you're going to pander to the Black male vote by giving them money and access to weed? It's like, how little do you think of your voters to put something out like that? And if a Republican did something like that, I hate to be like, oh, if it was on the flip side, but seriously, if a Republican did that, they'd be calling them a bigot. And this is exactly what it is. It's like, why don't you actually listen to these voters? If you ever go and listen to that Atlantic hip hop radio program, The Breakfast Club with Charlamagne the God, and and these people call in, these Black male voters call in and they're like, quit shilling so hard for Kamala Harris. She is not the one. I cannot afford my life. That is the reason why I'll be voting for Donald Trump. And it has nothing to do with all the rest of this stuff. And it's funny that you can have all of this evidence out there and yet her campaign still runs it like it's 2012. It's not that anymore. People are woken up.
Mary, did you make this documentary prior to this CBS News 60 Minutes debacle.
Yes, it's too bad we did too, because it would have been great to add that in there. There have been several things that this has come out that I'm like, man, should have been able to add this in there, because this stealth editing on this and making her look like she's smarter than she is just goes perfectly in line with everything that we promote in this documentary, where it's just side by side reality. It's what they try and show the American people and what the reality of her campaign is.
And I mean, this is, we talk about, cleaning up Kamala. There's ways of doing this through editorial choices, not editing choices, but just editorial choices.
Yep.
You saw this in both debates. The questions that were asked in both debates, the ABC News debate, as well as the previous one with Joe Biden, that was a CNN debate, which I think was better handled. And then the vice presidential debate between Vance and Tim Walz, right? The question sets were identical between the CBS and the CBS one with Walz and ABC with Trump and Harris. They were identical issue sets, and they didn't ask about China. They didn't ask about Iran. They didn't ask about North Korea. They didn't ask about. They didn't press very hard on inflation. They barely mentioned immigration, and especially with the Trump one, he kept having to inject it into his answers to other things, right? So there's those ways of covering up. But I've never seen anything like what CBS News did with this interview with Kamala Harris, where they released a promo clip and it got so much attention for the absolute nonsense answer that she gave Bill Whitaker that CBS or 60 Minutes or both went back and swapped the answer. And now the transcript. I have never, ever heard of that. And it's astonishing that CBS News knew that they could do that without any consequences. And they're not going to get any consequences. None of the rest of their competitors are calling them out for that, which is also amazing to me. I mean, that's like almost a cardinal sin. You're changing the story just because you want to help a candidate. I mean, that's
honestly, it's incredible. I think the biggest sign of this being terrible for CBS and for Harris is the fact that she is so desperate to sit down with Fox News. She's going to sit down with Brett Baer on Wednesday.
I was going to ask about that too.
And Brett has already come out and said that if they have to edit for time, that Fox is going to release the transcript in full. It's pre-recorded, which I highly doubt she would ever sit down for anything live. I don't think that she could honestly handle that as far as like just being able to get through it. I think she needs the pre-recorded just as a safety blanket to be able to get through these kinds of things. But for him to come out and say, yes, it's going to be pre-recorded. If we can't show the entire thing live, then we're going to release the entire transcript, speaks to how badly internally the media companies are talking about this CBS 60 Minutes interview that she had. But it's not the first time. I mean, you look at all the interviews that she's done, they've been pre-recorded. You can see the cuts, and then you can see that they gave her a little bit of, editing, finishing job, and, try to help her out with those ways, because she physically can't help herself than to do the awkward smiles, the awkward laughs. I mean, we talked about the debates a minute ago, and one of the things I thought was really kind of goes to this point perfectly as far as how the media treats each candidate was not only just in the Donald Trump Kamala Harris debate, where every question to her was asked like, how would you like to do this? Or is there a way that you would do this? But to him, it was pretty much like, you are a bad man. And because you are a bad man, this thing happened. Will you do anything differently? That's how the questioning goes. But in the Vance debate, it speaks to the fact that they know she can't handle the questions. Neither can Walz. Whenever they start talking about Hurricane Helene and the devastation that it's caused. And at this point, when that debate happened, it was at the height of it. We're getting videos of mudslides taking entire towns out. We're getting, reports back that, sadly, there were like bodies in the trees and people aren't getting any help. And it's really speaking to how she's going to govern, if this is how the administration's handling this now, just imagine if she takes over. And instead of asking Walz about this, the question was to Vance, and it was about climate change. It wasn't even about how are you going to help the American people, because they understand that there's no real compassion. There's no real understanding how to govern. And so the only way to do that is to be like, oh, look at the boogeyman. You don't believe in climate change. So we're going to try and push this question off onto you so that it gives an easy layup for Waltz on the other side. And that's just how the media handles these types of things, to try and make it seem like, all the compassion's on the Democrat side, when in reality, they're just hurting the American people with every step they take.
Mary, I don't disagree with you at all. And it's clear that was the intent with these question sets. And it's clear that the media is all in right now for Kamala, which is the reason why Cleaning Up Kamala is going to be, I think, pretty popular. It's behind the paywall at dailycaller.com. So you have to be a member to watch it. You can watch the trailer. I had it up in the post yesterday, the one that where I was discussing the CNN article. Yesterday being today, actually, I'm talking about in terms of when this thing is actually going to hit. On Tuesday, I have it embedded. So one last question, I think, before we wrap things up is, you talk about Harris going on with Bret Baier, which to me is a desperation move.
Absolutely.
She's also talking about going on with Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And the thing with Joe Rogan is that's just live, right? I mean, he podcasts too, but he doesn't edit his shows. It's right. It's like I do with these. I very rarely edit anything on any of my podcasts or shows, only when there's some sort of technical difficulty. I ask the producers to just step in and edit that stuff out. And that's Joe Rogan. I mean, he does, I think it's a 3-hour, right? It's a 3-hour show.
Yeah, they're typically between 3 and 3.5 hour long episodes. And which is funny that you mention it, because when she went on Call Her Daddy, right again, in the height of right in the height of Hurricane Helene, she goes on a sex podcast, which is just, abhorrent. But so she does this, and the episode's only 45 minutes long. And most of those episodes are an hour or so long. And so you're already looking at a shortened time. I honestly, truly don't believe that she will actually go on Joe Rogan. Even if Rogan says, come on, we'll do it, all those things. Can you imagine him, Joe Rogan, going, Jamie, look up that time that Kamala Harris said that, immigrants are the best thing that ever happened to America. Go ahead and go on there and pick up that video of her when she was cackling after, this devastating tragedy. And then she has to sit there and answer for this. And I just don't think that she would ever be able to handle that, especially not for how long it is. And then could you imagine if he goes on a tangent about aliens and she's like, I don't know what to say. It's not happening. I think that this is a complete PR stunt. They want to get it out there that she would be open to going on Joe Rogan without ever having to go on Joe Rogan type of thing. But, if you go to dailycaller.com and you sign up for the Patriots membership, you get access to all these documentaries, Cleaning Up Kamala. You also get all of our previous ones. We talk about the 2020 election, COVID, the woke education that we have here in America. We talk about squatters and how they're taking over our housing crisis, and all, what we try and do with these documentaries is give you enough information to be able to go out and, and make good choices in America now and how it stands, and hopefully help you with what your decision making is going to be in 2024.
Mary Rooke, where can people find you on social media?
I am on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can go at Mary Rooke. That's ROOKE. So at Mary Rooke _.
There you go, at Mary Rooke _. So make sure that people got that. And of course, dailycaller.com. Go over there, get the Patriots membership. You get access to all sorts of different content, but especially Cleaning Up Kamala, which is the latest from the Daily Caller, dailycaller.com. Mary Rooke, thank you so much for spending a little time with us today. Hopefully we get a chance to do this again soon.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks so much, Ed.